The desperate signal, the Discovery commander, Sarah Chen, floated through the observation deck of Jupiter Station, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor with each step. The massive gas giant rotated slowly below, its red storms swirling, like an ancient eye watching the cosmos. Sarah had been stationed here for 3 years, monitoring deep space communications and watching for threats to Earth's expanding colonies. Most days brought nothing but cosmic background radiation and the occasional asteroid. Miner's check-in call. Today was different. The alert klaxon echoed through the station's corridors, sending crew members rushing to their posts. Sarah pushed off from the observation window and glided toward the communications center, where screens flickered with data streams and warning lights painted everything in urgent red dot. Dr. Marcus Webb hunched over his workstation, his graying beard trembling, as he muttered calculations under his breath. The xenolinguist had spent 20 years studying theoretical alien languages, but this was the first time he faced a real extraterrestrial signal. His hands shook as he adjusted the frequency filters, trying to make sense of the mathematical patterns flowing across his screens. "What do we have, Marcus?" Sarah asked, pulling herself into the chair beside him. Marcus looked up with eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Commander, this signal is artificial. No doubt about it. The mathematical sequences are too complex for natural phenomena, and the frequency modulations show intentional design." He pointed to a series of wave patterns on his main display. "But here's the problem. It's encrypted with algorithms I've never seen before. Whoever sent this is far more advanced than us." Sarah studied the data scrolling past. The signal strength was weak, suggesting it came from very far away. But the transmission power required to reach them across such distances meant the senders had technology that made human space. Communications looked like smoke signals. "How long to decode it?" she asked. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "Could be hours, could be weeks. I'm running every decryption protocol we have, plus some theoretical frameworks I developed for exactly this scenario. The good news is, the parts of the signal repeat in patterns. That suggests they wanted to be understood." The station's intercom crackled to life. "Commander Chen to the command center immediately. Priority Alpha." Sarah left Marcus to his work and made her way to the station's nerve center. Captain Torres stood before the main tactical display, his weathered face grim as he studied long-range sensor data. Torres had fought in the Mars Independence War and the asteroid belt conflicts. He knew what military buildups looked like. "Sarah, we have a problem," Torres said without turning around. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving through the outer system. Whatever's out there is big, and it's not using any propulsion system in our databases." The tactical display showed 3 large contacts moving between Saturn and Uranus. They were too far away for detailed scans, but their energy output suggested ships larger than anything humans had ever built. The contacts moved in perfect formation, suggesting coordination and purpose. Could they be connected to Marcus's signal? Sarah asked. Torres nodded grimly. "Timeline matches. The signal started broadcasting about 6 hours before these contacts appeared on our sensors. Either we're looking at first contact, or we're about to become someone's conquest." Breaking the code for hours later, Marcus burst into the command center with printouts scattered in his wake. His hair was wild and his uniform wrinkled from hours bent over his computers, but his eyes blazed with the fire of discovery. "I broke it," he announced breathlessly. The encryption was mathematical, poetry, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He spread his papers across the central table. "Commander, this is a distress call, but not just any distress call. It's a plea for help from an entire civilization." Sarah leaned forward as Marcus explained. His translation: the message came from a species calling themselves the Valathi. They were traders and explorers who had spread across dozens of star systems over thousands of years. But something called the Crimson Swarm had found them. The Valathi described the swarm as a hive mind of insectoid creatures that consumed entire worlds. They didn't just take resources or establish colonies. They devoured everything living, converting organic matter into more swarm creatures. 17 Valathi worlds had already fallen, with billions of lives lost. "The signal is coming from their last stronghold," Marcus explained, pointing to coordinates on the star map. "A system called Kethvar, about 40 light-years from here. They estimate they have maybe days before the swarm breaks through their final defenses." Captain Torres studied the tactical implications. 40 light-years. That's 2 weeks at maximum hyperspace velocity. By the time we could get there, it would all be over. Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on her shoulders. Humanity had dreamed of first contact for centuries, but not like this. The Valathi were asking for military aid against an enemy that could consume worlds. Earth's space forces were designed to fight human rebels and asteroid pirates, not alien invasions. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The Valathi have been monitoring our radio transmissions for decades. They know about human warfare capabilities. They're specifically asking for help because they believe we might have weapons that could work against the swarm." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. An advanced alien civilization was calling for help from primitive humans because they thought humanity might be savage enough to fight something that had conquered the galaxy. The Valathi Plath breakthrough came during Sarah's sleep cycle. Marcus had programmed the computers to search for real-time communication protocols within the Valathi signal. At 0347 hours, the pattern changed. Instead of a repeating distress call, a new signal emerged. Personal, direct, desperate, Sarah found. Marcus in the communication center, talking to empty air in broken alien syllables. On his screen, mathematical symbols flowed in response to his words. First contact was happening in real time. "Her name is Zaranine," Marcus explained quietly. "She's a Valathi survivor aboard one of their last ships. They've been running from the swarm for 3 months, broadcasting their distress call to anyone who might listen. We're the first to respond." The alien's voice came through the speakers as mathematical tones that Marcus's computer translated into words. "Your response brings hope to dying hearts. The Crimson Swarm has consumed our children, our worlds, our future. We are scholars and traders, not warriors. We know not how to fight such creatures." Sarah leaned toward the microphone. "Zara 29, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Jupiter. Station, we want to help, but we need to understand what we're facing." The response came in bursts of data that filled Marcus's screens with tactical information. The swarm used living ships that grew rather than being built. Their weapons were biological, firing corrosive acids and viral agents that converted enemy crews into swarm creatures. They had never faced kinetic weapons or explosive ordnance because most spacefaring species had evolved beyond such primitive technologies. The swarm has conquered 47 species across 12,000 years. Zaranine's translated voice continued. All used energy weapons, plasma shields, and particle beams. None used the solid projectiles and chemical explosives that your species favors. Perhaps the primitiveness that other species mock might be our salvation. Torres grabbed Sarah's arm. Commander, she's right. Our weapons are designed to punch through armor and hull plating. If these swarm ships are biological, they might not have defenses against good old-fashioned bullets and bombs. Sarah made the hardest decision of her career. Zara 29, we will come. It will take time to gather our forces, but humanity will answer your call for aid. The mathematical tones that came back through the speakers carried such relief and gratitude that Marcus wiped tears from his eyes. Human friends, you offer hope where none existed. We will hold until you arrive. The Valathia remember their debts. Humanity's decision within 6 hours. Sarah's message had reached Earth's governing council. The response came back faster than she expected, carrying the authority of humanity's highest leadership. Captain Torres received sealed orders that made him smile. For the first time since the crisis began. Asterisk. The Terran Defense Corps had been developing experimental weapon systems for years, preparing for the day when humanity might face alien threats. Project Godslayer included magnetic accelerator cannons that could fire tungsten slugs at significant fractions of light speed. The missiles carried fusion warheads powerful enough to crack asteroids. The ships themselves were built for speed and endurance, designed by a species that had learned to survive in the vacuum of space through pure, stubborn determination. Admiral Victoria Stone's voice came through the quantum communication link from Earth. Commander Chen, you are hereby authorized to coordinate with the incoming task force. We're sending everything we can spare, plus some things we probably can't afford to lose. The scientific value of this first contact situation, combined with the humanitarian crisis, justifies significant risk. Torres received his fleet roster and whistled appreciatively. 12 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and the carrier Valkyrie with a full wing of fighters, plus support ships carrying enough ammunition to level small moons. The task force would arrive at Jupiter Station in 18 hours, then immediately jump to hyperspace for the journey to Valathi. Space. It would be the largest human military force ever assembled for an interstellar mission. Sarah found herself thinking about the weight of the moment. Humanity was about to enter galactic warfare for the first time, defending strangers against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. The Valathi had asked for help from a species they barely knew, betting their survival on humanity's willingness to fight for others. Fleet preparation. The human fleet arrived like a swarm of metal angels, their fusion drives painting Jupiter's atmosphere with trails of fire. Admiral Victoria Stone commanded from the flagship Terra's Hammer, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons that had never been tested in combat. She was a veteran of humanity's colonial wars, known for innovative tactics and absolute determination to protect human interests. Sarah met with Stone aboard the flagship, surrounded by displays showing the tactical situation in Valathi's space. The swarm had broken through 2 more defensive lines while the human fleet assembled. Time was running out faster than anyone had hoped. Our advantage is surprise, Stone explained, pointing to reconnaissance data transmitted by surviving Valathi ships. The swarm has never faced kinetic weapons or nuclear explosives. Their defenses are built around energy absorption and redirection. They literally don't know how to handle a tungsten slug moving at 12% of light speed. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Calcine Reaper, represented the fighter squadrons. He was young but had trained extensively in zero-gravity combat maneuvers. His pilots were eager to test their new plasma pulse weapons against an enemy that had conquered most of the galaxy. The Valathi data shows swarm ships cluster around planets during their feeding phases, Morrison reported. They're vulnerable to fighter attack during harvest operations because they focus on consumption rather than defense. Dr. Webb had worked continuously to establish better communication with Zara-9 and other Valathi survivors. The aliens had provided detailed information about swarm biology and tactics, information that could mean the difference between victory and becoming another consumed species. The swarm reproduces by converting other life forms, Webb explained. Every creature they capture becomes part of their collective consciousness. But the process takes time, and it can be disrupted by trauma. If we hit them hard enough, fast enough, we might be able to save some of their recent captives. Jump toward the human fleet entered hyperspace with the fury of a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer determination. Sarah remained aboard Terra's Hammer as a liaison with the Valathi, maintaining communication with Zara-9 and other survivors as the human ships raced across the galaxy. During the journey, more tactical data arrived from the battle zone. The swarm had begun their final assault on the last Valathi world. Orbital platforms fell one by one as the aliens consumed everything in their path. The population centers were being evacuated to deep space, but there were too few ships and too many people, human friends. Zara-9's transmitted voice carried desperation that needed no translation. The swarm has reached our final world. Our children flee in ships not meant for long journeys. We estimate 6 days before our species faces extinction. Admiral Stone calculated arrival times and shook her head. We'll be there in 4 days if we push the engines beyond safe limits. It's going to be close. The fleet pushed through hyperspace at velocities that made their hulls groan with stress. Engineers worked around the clock to keep the ships together as they raced to answer a cry for help from strangers who had become friends. In the fighter bays, pilots checked their weapons and thought about the bizarre situation they were flying. Sarah spent her time studying everything known about the enemy. The swarm had evolved in the dark spaces between stars, developing technology based on biological adaptation rather than mechanical engineering. They were intelligent but utterly alien, seeing other life forms only as resources to be consumed and converted. As the fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace at the edge of Valathi space, Sarah realized that humanity was about to face its greatest test. They were racing to save an entire species from extinction, armed with weapons designed to fight other humans. The next few hours would determine whether humanity could stand among the stars as protectors, or if they would watch their first alien friends die screaming in the darkness. Steel angels from a death world arrival at Heltha. Human fleet dropped out of hyperspace into a system painted with the colors of war. Admiral Victoria Stone stood on the bridge of Terra's Hammer, watching as her tactical displays filled with contacts that defied human understanding. The Valathi homeworld of Keth Prime burned beneath a swarm of organic ships that moved like living creatures rather than manufactured vessels. "Tactical report," Stone commanded, her voice steady despite the horror unfolding on the screens. Commander Hayes, her tactical officer, struggled to make sense of the sensor data. "Admiral, I count over 200 swarm vessels of various sizes. The largest ones are Jesus Christ. They're 15 kilometers long. The smallest are still bigger than our heavy cruisers." The swarm ships looked like someone had crossed deep sea. Creatures with spacecraft. They had organic curves and pulsing sections that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. Tentacle-like appendages extended from their hulls, grabbing chunks of debris and feeding them into massive maws that served as both weapons and processing centers. Sarah Chen watched from the command center as streams of refugees fled the dying planet in small civilian ships. The Valathi vessels were elegant things, built for trade and exploration rather than war. They moved with graceful efficiency, but there were simply too few of them to evacuate billions of people. Human fleet, this is Zara 9, came the familiar, translated voice through the communication system. Your arrival brings light to our darkest hour, but the swarm is too vast. We understand if you must retreat to save your own people. Admiral Stone activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Stone. We didn't come 40 light years to turn around at the first sign of trouble. Battle stations. Prepare to show these bugs what humans do to bullies. First Strike Lieutenant Jake Morrison led his fighter squadron toward the swarm's outer perimeter, his hands steady on the controls despite the acid churning in his stomach. The plasma pulse weapons mounted on his fighter had never been tested against living targets, but today would provide plenty of data for the weapons engineers back home. Reaper Squadron, maintain formation, Morrison commanded. Remember, these things don't know what kinetic weapons can do. We're going to teach them. The swarm's defensive pickets moved to intercept the human fighters. These smaller vessels looked like flying insects the size of houses, with wings that rippled with energy patterns. They fired streams of corrosive fluid that ate through space. Like acid rain, Morrison's squadrons scattered, using the maneuverability advantages their engineers had built into every human fighter. Where the alien weapons moved in predictable arcs, human pilots could change direction instantly, diving and weaving through the acid streams with movements that seemed impossible to the watching swarm. The first human weapons fired at 12:47 hours, Terran Standard Time. Morrison's plasma cannon sent a bolt of superheated gas through the center of a swarm picket ship. The alien vessel convulsed as the energy tore through organic systems that had no defense against such concentrated heat. Green fluid leaked from the wounds as the creature ship died in the vacuum. Direct hit, Morrison shouted. These things can't handle thermal weapons any better than kinetic ones. The main human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Magnetic accelerator cannons sent tungsten slugs screaming across space at velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons. The slugs punched through swarm holes like bullets through wet paper, creating massive wounds that leaked atmosphere and biological fluids. Nuclear missiles followed the kinetic bombardment, their fusion warheads creating miniature suns that sterilized entire sections of the enemy fleet. The swarm had never encountered weapons that worked by creating explosions rather than directing energy, and their defenses were useless against the expanding spheres of plasma and radiation. Admiral Stone watched a tactical display as human weapons tore into the swarm formation. All ships, concentrate fire on the large harvesters near the planet. We need to stop them from consuming the population centers. The swarms surprised deep within the largest swarm vessel, Hive Lord Dekvor, experienced something it had not felt in 12,000 years of conquest: confusion. The collective consciousness that connected all swarm creatures buzzed with alarm as ships died faster than they could be replaced. These new creatures, these humans, fought with weapons that made no sense. They threw solid objects through space at impossible speeds. They created explosions of pure energy that destroyed everything within massive spheres of annihilation. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to coordinate their attacks without sharing a collective consciousness. The HFY had consumed 47 species across the galaxy. All of them had fought with energy weapons and particle beams that the swarm could absorb and redirect. These humans used crude, primitive weapons that bypassed every defense the swarm had evolved. The Hive Lord sent mental commands through the collective, ordering the fleet to adapt to these new threats. Swarm ships began spreading out, trying to minimize the damage from the humans' explosive weapons. Bioforms that had served as energy absorbers shifted their molecular structure, attempting to develop defenses against kinetic weapons. But adaptation took time, and the humans weren't giving them any breathing room. Captain Torres, commanding the destroyer pack, led his ships in close-range attacks on the swarm's flanking elements. His vessels darted between the larger alien ships like piranhas attacking whales, their point defense systems chewing through smaller swarm creatures, while their main guns punched holes in anything larger than a fighter. "This is Torres to all destroyer captains," he broadcast. "These things adapt fast, but they can't adapt to being dead. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't give them time to figure out what we're doing." The swarm began launching boarding pods at the human ships, trying to use their standard tactic of converting enemy crews into additional swarm biomass. But the pods, designed to attach two ships with smooth hulls and standardized docking ports, couldn't find purchase on human vessels covered in armor plating and defensive spikes. When boarding pods did manage to attach, they found human marines waiting with weapons that had been designed to kill other humans in confined spaces. Shotguns loaded with explosive shells turned swarm boarding parties into clouds of green mist. Flamethrowers burned through organic corridors that weren't designed to resist chemical fire. Orbital, Rescue Isle, the main fleet engaged the swarm battle line. Admiral Stone authorized the most dangerous part of their mission. 3 heavy cruisers broke formation and dove toward the planet, racing to reach Valathi evacuation ships before the swarm harvesters could consume them. Commander Lisa Park piloted the cruiser Edinburgh through a maze of debris and acid streams, her ship's armor scarred by near misses from swarm weapons. Her mission was to provide cover for the fleeing civilian vessels, buying time for the Valathi to escape their dying world. The planet's surface was a nightmare of organic consumption. Swarm harvesters had landed near major cities, extending proboscis-like feeding tubes that sucked up everything in their path. Buildings, vehicles, and people disappeared into the alien digestive systems, converted into raw biomass for the swarm's reproductive cycle. "This is Edinburgh to Valathi civilian ships," Park broadcast. "We're here to escort you out of the gravity. Well, form up behind us and we'll clear you a path through the swarm perimeter." Elder Minkala, the spiritual leader of the Valathi people, responded from the refugee ship Gentle Current. Her translated voice carried both gratitude and sorrow. "Human warriors, you risk your lives for strangers. This kindness will be remembered in our songs for 10,000 generations." Park's ship engaged the swarm harvesters with everything in her arsenal. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes created mushroom clouds on the planet's surface as they destroyed alien feeding stations. The Edinburgh's main guns fired continuously, their shells tearing through swarm ground forces that had never faced explosive ordnance. The rescue convoy fought its way through the swarm picket line, human weapons clearing a corridor of death. Through the alien fleet, behind them, millions of Valathi civilians escaped in ships packed beyond safe capacity, fleeing toward the outer system where the main human fleet was systematically destroying the swarm. Battle formations dot the Death World. Advantage as the battle raged across the Kethprim system. the fundamental differences between human and swarm biology began to tell. The aliens had evolved in the sterile environment of deep space. Their metabolism optimized for efficiency and collective coordination. They were used to overwhelming enemies through numbers and superior technology. Humans had evolved on Earth, a world that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years. They were used to fighting when outnumbered, adapting quickly to new threats, and refusing to surrender even when logic demanded it. More importantly, they had learned to work together without sharing a collective consciousness, making them unpredictable to enemies who relied on reading unified mental patterns. Admiral Stone coordinated the human fleet through a combination of tactical doctrine and individual initiative that the swarm couldn't understand or counter. When Hive Lord Dekvo sent mental commands to counter human tactics, the humans had already changed their approach, adapting faster than the alien collective consciousness could process. "All ships, execute pattern Delta 7, Stone commanded. The human fleet scattered into smaller formations, each group targeting different sections of the swarm line. Where the aliens expected unified resistance, they faced chaos that somehow worked with deadly efficiency. Lieutenant Morrison's fighter squadrons had learned to exploit the swarm's biological nature. They targeted the nerve clusters that connected different sections of the alien ships, causing massive creatures to convulse and lose coordination. When a swarm vessel lost its ability to coordinate its organic systems, it became easy prey for human weapons. The turning point came when Terra Hammer engaged Dekvo's flagship directly. The human dreadnought's main guns fired a continuous barrage of tungsten slugs and nuclear missiles, overwhelming the alien vessel's ability to adapt and regenerate. As the Hive Lord's ship began to break apart, the collective consciousness that controlled the entire swarm fleet wavered. Smaller swarm vessels, suddenly cut off from central coordination, began acting independently. Some fled toward the edge of the system. Others attacked each other in confusion. The unified alien fleet dissolved into chaos as human weapons continued their relentless bombardment. Victory and New Alliances 6 hours after the human fleet arrived at Keth Prime. The last swarm vessel exploded in a burst of green fire and organic debris. The aliens who had terrorized the galaxy for 12,000 years had been defeated by a species they had never encountered, using weapons they didn't understand, and displaying a ferocity that defied their understanding of how sentient beings should behave. Admiral Stone stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display as human ships moved through the debris field, searching for survivors and securing the system. The victory had cost them 2 destroyers and a dozen fighters, but they had saved an entire species from extinction. "Human fleet, this is Elder Minkala of the Valathi High Council," came the transmission from the refugee ships. "Your people have done something no species has accomplished in 12 millennia. You have defeated the swarm and saved our children from consumption. How can we ever repay such a debt?" Sarah Chen, speaking for humanity's civilian leadership, responded with words that would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. "Elder Minkala, we didn't come here for payment. We came because it was right. Perhaps it's time the galaxy had some defenders who aren't afraid to fight for others." The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of human impact on galactic civilization. The swarm had been the most feared force in known space, and their defeat by a previously unknown species sent shockwaves through hundreds of star systems. Other alien civilizations began reaching out to humanity, some seeking alliance, others wanting to understand how such a young species had accomplished the impossible. Dr. Webb worked with Valathi scholars to establish formal diplomatic protocols between the species. The aliens offered to share their advanced space travel technology and star charts showing the SL locations of other civilizations. In return, humanity offered military protection and the kind of innovative thinking that came from evolving on a world that demanded constant adaptation. Lieutenant Morrison found himself promoted to squadron leader and assigned to establish the first joint human Valathi defense force. His pilots would train alien crews in human combat tactics while learning Valathi navigation and sensor technology. The partnership promised to make both species stronger than they could ever be alone, as the human fleet prepared to escort the Valathi refugees to temporary homes in the outer colonies. Admiral Stone reflected on what they had accomplished. Humanity had answered a cry for help from strangers and proven themselves capable of standing among the stars as protectors rather than conquerors. The galaxy was about to learn that the death world called Earth had produced more than just another spacefaring species. It had created defenders who would fight for justice even when the odds seemed impossible, and who measured victory not in territory conquered but in lives saved. The swarm was defeated, but their defeat marked the beginning of humanity's true journey among the stars. Earth's children had answered the call for aid, and in doing so, they had announced to the galaxy that some species were worth protecting, and some fights were worth having, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, the story of the battle at Keth Prime spread through the galactic communication networks. The tale of humans arriving with weapons of war to save strangers became legend, and the name Deathworlders became synonymous with hope rather than fear. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not as conquerors or supplicants, but as the species that would come when others called for help, armed with the fury of a world that had forged them in fire and ice, and the determination of a people who had learned that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. The stars were no longer empty of friends, and Earth's children would never fight alone again. Asterisk.